Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Shevuot daf. Hey, today's daf is sponsored by Gabrielle Altman in honor of her husband, Daniel Altman, on his fourth completion of the Daf Yomi cycle. May he continue teaching the daf and inspiring people to learn the daf for decades to come in good health. Mazal tov. Something to aspire for. Okay, we're going to continue our daf. We are in Shevuot daf Hey, and what we did in the previous daf was we were trying to explain the Mishnah still. Does it accord like Rabbi Shmuel? Does it accord with Rabbi Akiva? In the end, we said it's Rebbi's own opinion. And now we're trying to prove he holds like Rabbi Shmuel in one issue, Rabbi Akiva in the other issue. And that's what we were trying to prove. How do we know that Rebbi actually holds this way? And we were in the middle of trying to figure out in Yediot, right? We explained very well why in Yediot HaTuma he holds like Rabbi Ishmael. Now we have to figure out why does he hold like Rabbi Akiva when it comes to the oaths. And then we said, it's because he darshans riboy, miut, and riboy. Then the Gemara ended with saying, wait a minute. And we proved that he darshans riboy, miut, and riboy. We showed it in the case of Pidyon Haben. The Gemara said, what do you mean? By the case of Martzea, piercing the hole, and what you can use to pierce a hole, Rebbe employs the klalu pratu klal methodology, which is much more exclusive, not allowing very many methods, which is the klalu prat, the type of drasha. To which we said, you're right, Rebbe, in fact, ba'alma klali prate darisham, on the first line of Daf He, yes, he really does darshan klalu pratu klal. And hachaynu tama, so why in the Pidyon Haben case is it a riboy and mute? And this I already mentioned yesterday, which is kedetana debei Rabbi Yishmael, as the Tana and Hasa Rabbi Yishmael says, detana debei Rabbi Yishmael, b'mayim shnei pa'amim, ein ze klal prat, ela riba u'mi'et. When you have a case, in the case that they're quoting, when you have a case where there's a klal, and prat, then you don't do klal prat, you do riboy u'miut, because it's not klal prat klal, it's something different. And because the two klalim appear and then the prat, therefore, because the two klalim appear together, the two ribuyim, as we're going to call them in this case, the two inclusive terms, we're going to actually include more cases. And that's what we showed with the Pidyon Haben case. And the case that we're talking about is the ma'anim, okay, which is what kosher fish. Et zet tuchlu mikol asher b'mayim, kol asher lo snapir b'kaskeset, b'mayim, b'yamim, u'b'nechalim, otam tochelu. There, b'mayim, ein ze klal prat. It's zet tuchlu mikol asher b'mayim, that's the klal, right? By yamim, I'm looking at Rashi. Et zet tuchlu mikol asher b'mayim, eat these things that are in the water, that's the klal. By yamim u'b'nechalim is the prat. B'mayim chazar v'kalal. Okay, but Pali Gale, that's one Tana. Okay, and that Tana reads it as B'mayim, B'yamim u'b'nechalim, right? And then B'mayim. But if you pay close attention, it says it's Zetuchlu mikol asher b'mayim, kol asher lo snapir b'kaskeset b'mayim, that's also water, and then B'yamim u'b'nechalim, which are only certain types of water. So the Tana de Rabbi Ishmael says b'mayim smuchin zeh lazeh, and then it says B'yamim u'b'nechalim, and therefore this is not a classic klal prat. And therefore, they put it in the middle there, the klal, to say it's a riboy and miut. And that's why Rebbi does it. But Rebbi doesn't really darshan riboy and miut, which now puts us in a problem because the whole thing was that Rebbi darshans riboy and miut, and that's how he held specifically like Rabbi Akiva when it came to the Shevuot case. Now we're going to be in a little bit of trouble. Rabbanan. So first of all, before we get to our trouble, we're going to just explain the rabbis who disagree with this principle of Rabbi Yishmael. Amar Ravina kid amre b'ma'arava, as they say in Ma'arava in Eretz Yisrael. Kol makom shatam would say shtei klalot hasmuchot ze lezo hatil prat b'neihem dunam b'klalu prat. Okay, they say simply it's a klalu prat. So what if it's in a different order? It doesn't really make a difference. And that's basically the Tana who disagrees with Rabbi Yishmael and the Tana who disagrees with the Rebbi, basically. So now they say, here comes our problem. Hashtad amar Rebbi klali prate darish. Bal korcha kasha Shevuot. Now we're back to square one, and Shevuot doesn't fit with Rebbi. So we're going to change what Rav Kahana came and tried to explain. Right? If you remember, he said it's actually Rebbi's own opinion. Ela b'Shvuot nasa b'liba de Rabbi Akiva v'leilo sfira le. And now we go back to the original Rav Yosef. When we say it's really that Rebbi taught this line like Rabbi Ishmael, that line like Rabbi Akiva, but he doesn't actually hold like Rabbi Akiva on this issue, because if he did hold like Rabbi Akiva on this issue, it would be because he held riboy and miut, and he doesn't hold we do riboy and miut in a regular case. Only in that unique case of a klal klalu prat, we're going to do riboy and miut according to Rebbi. Okay, Gufa. Now we're going to go back to something we mentioned yesterday. How do you know that you're not chayav unless you have knowledge in the beginning? You knew, then you forgot, and then you knew at the end, right? That you were impure. Talmud lomar v'ne'elam shnei pamim devrei Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva again darshans this ne'elam, and because the yediyah comes after the ne'elam, and we said that wasn't necessary, put the yediyah before. That means the yediyah has to happen before, and obviously the yediyah happens after. Otherwise, how would you bring a korban if you didn't actually know you did something wrong? Rebbi Omer no tzarich v'hareu ne'emar v'ne'elam michlal sheyada. Rebbi says you don't need any special drasha to teach yediyah before. The word ne'elam, and that's what we're going to talk about soon, implies that you must have known, because ne'elam means you forgot something, which means you knew originally. V'hu yada, harekan shtei yediyot, right? And then it says v'hu yada again, so that must be, right? Im kain, so you don't need, that's obvious that there's yediyah before, yediyah after. Im kain matam alomar v'ne'elam, l'chayev al halim tumah v'aleim mikdash. Why is ne'elam appear twice? You don't really need it. It's to teach you ne'elam, tumah you forgot, and ne'elam mikdash or kodshim. Amar. So now we're going to go back and deal with this one phrase. V'ne'elam michlal sheyada. My mashma. How do you assume that the word ne'elam means you knew? Amar Rava midlo k'tiv v'hi aluma mimenu. It said this is something that is unknown to the person. Then it would mean unknown, and maybe never was known. But because it says it was ne'elam, as if it disappeared from the person's knowledge, implies that they knew before. Amar Abaye. Abaye says, wait a minute. Every time it says v'ne'elam, it means there was the idea before. Abaye is going to bring a case where it's clear there wasn't. Sotah dechtiv v'ne'elam me'inei isha. It was. Now you have to read the whole pasuk and understand. This is the second pasuk. Okay, the first pasuk about sotah is shaki tisteh. You have a woman who goes off the path or ends up cheating on her husband. But then the pasuk explains the whole process. It starts from the beginning and it says. V'shachav ishota, there's a woman who a husband slept with her. And foreign man, not her husband, slept with her. Shichvat zera. V'ne'elam me'inei isha. Her husband, now, what's the word? Ne'elam. He didn't know. Now, here clearly the context is he doesn't know, and it's not that he knew and forgot. Okay, and we're going to see why in a minute. V'nistera, and then she goes into a room alone with this man. V'hi nitma'an, she became impure. But there were no witnesses. She wasn't caught doing this, right? And then we basically go through the whole process, and he warns her, and then he, and the whole thing, and then he brings her, and she drinks the sotah waters. Now, if you're going to say here, it means he knew originally that she had slept with this other man, right? What's the sotah? It's all about figuring out if she did or didn't. Not that he knew from the beginning. If he knew before, the waters don't even work to check. Now, the assumption here is either he knew before, and then he engages in relations again with his wife, or perhaps he knew before but doesn't divorce her. Either which way, he's done something wrong, because if he really knew, he had to divorce her, and he certainly can't have relations with her. So here now, it's possible that they're assuming that the man then had relations with her, because you're going to see what they say in the continuation. So if he knew and then engaged in relations with her, or just did divorce her right away, mibad kulamaya, the water can't check, because vahatanya, it says in a braita, v'nikah ish me'avon, and the man is cleansed of iniquity. Now, this is kind of at the end of the process, right? Like when he does it and she drinks the water, he's cleansed of iniquity. Now, it seems to me like it wasn't his fault, but not like he was really being blamed in the first place. How did they dart, right? And then it says, Vaishayi tisat avona, right? And she bears the sin of what she did. No, but the drasha is, why does it say Aish nika v'nika ha'ish me'avon? They darshan it bizman sha'aish menuket me'avon hamayim bodkim et ishto. If he is clean from sin, then the waters work. Ein ha'ish menuket me'avon ein hamayim bodkim et ishto. If he's not clean from iniquity, which really means if he slept with his wife after knowing that she was a sotah, okay, which he's not allowed to do, the waters won't check anymore because he did something wrong. Now, it doesn't mean like cheated on his taxes or something. What it means is he engaged in relations with his wife, or perhaps, according to some of the commentaries, just didn't divorce her and stayed married to this woman who cheated on him, and when he knew that she had cheated. So if he knew for sure there's no way he can engage in relations with her, and then if he did, for sure the waters wouldn't work. And this is describing the whole process where she drinks the waters. So Ne'elam can't possibly mean that. And v'tu, and furthermore, in a different place, also ne'elam doesn't mean you knew before. Because about the Torah, it said in Iyov, dichtiv, ne'elam me'enei kochai. The secrets of the Torah, like the real true value of the Torah, is unknown to anybody. Okay, and nobody can grasp the depths or the greatness of it. And even from the birds in the sky, which they claim means the angels, even the angels don't even understand its value. Now it sounds like someone does know, but but a different pasuk says no humans living understand its value. So it seems clear this is unknown and was never known and won't be, right? So it can't be that every time it uses the word ne'elam, it means it was known before. So Abaye basically rejects Rava's proof of this. All this was to understand these words, why we assume when it says ne'elam, it means you knew before, which was what Rebbi said in the drasha. So Elam Abaye kasav Rebbi yidiat beit rabo shma yidiat. If you learned something when you were in school, that's considered knowledge. So if you learned the halacha, this right classical, who's smarter than a fifth grader, right? Kids learn all these things in school, and they know everything, right? You know when you learned it in school that a person who's impure can't go into the temple. That means you knew that this was not permitted, and that's what it means. That there was knowledge previously at some point in your life. You knew. But wait, the Mishnah describes a case, if you remember, if you didn't even know about it in the beginning, and then you found out later, right, which korban would atone for this. But there's nobody who didn't ever know if you're explaining Yediyah as you learned it in elementary school or high school, well, everybody went to high school, everybody went to elementary school, everybody learned these things. Amalei, which is a fascinating line, right? Everybody did that. So Amalei in mishkachala betinok shenishbala bein anochorim. They say no, you could have a case like that, and that's again, it's a unique way of reading our Mishnah. It's certainly not the way we've read it until now, which is that it's talking about a child that was taken into captivity among Gentiles, never grew up studying Torah, and didn't even know the basics. And that's what you would say. This Yidiyah, there was no Yidiyah in the beginning, is referring to that, and you could still explain it the way Abaye explained. Okay, now we're going to move on. Yitziot Shabbat Shtayin Shein Arba. Back to the Mishnah. We're going to go through Shabbat, and then we're going to go to Nigaim. Tananatam. It says in Masechet Shabbat. Okay, instead of 2 that are 4, they're actually going to have 8 cases. Okay, which is like 2 that are 8. Okay, or 2 that are 4 and 2 that are 4, which is 4 that are 8. I guess that would be the better way to say it. Yitziat Shabbat Shtayin Shein Arba B'fnim v'Shtayin Shein Arba B'chutz. There's 2 cases which are 4 cases inside, and there's 2 cases which are 4 cases outside. Okay, so Rashi says Arba B'fnim, Shtaim L'chiyuv. 2 are liable by Torah law. You'll bring a sacrifice. What's that? Hachnasa de'ani v'hachnasa de'bal habayit. Okay, it's when you bring B'fnim means you bring something inside. That's for Shida Rabim to Rashida Yachid. Those were the last 2 in our Mishnah, okay? Because we said the main one is going inside to outside, right? But also going inside, which is the Ani put it inside, right? Put his hand inside and put the item inside, or the Balabaya put his hand outside, took something from outside and brought it inside. Shtaim Liptor. But there's 2 cases where you're exempt. What is that? Now, there's 2 actions that have to happen for Hotzah to work. You have to be oker, you have to take it out of one domain and put it down in the other. What if the action was done by 2 different people? You'll be exempt. So if the Balabaya, for example, ze oker v'ze miniach, okay? So because it says ba'asotah, you have to do the whole action. So if the Balabaya is inside, puts his hand outside, takes the item outside, puts it in the hand of the Balabaya, which means that the Balabaya didn't do what's called the akira, taking it out of one reshut. The poor person did that, and then the Balabaya brings it inside. So he did the hanacha, the putting it down in the inside, but he didn't put it outside. And the reverse if the ani put his hand inside and then the Balabaya took it from his hand and put it down, it would be the same thing, where the akira was done by the poor person, moving it into the other domain, but the hanacha, the putting it down, was done by, I shouldn't say taking it out, taking it out, not putting it in, but taking it out and then placing it down. So it was done by 2 different people. And the reverse for the bachutz, it's the exact same thing, just the reverse, right? Going outside. So those are 4 cases that are 8. So why it brings you 2 that are 4 and 2 that are 4, instead of our case, which said 2 that are 4. Okay, that's the basic question. So, right, Mishna hacha detana shtayim shein arba v'tu lo. Why by us? It's just say two that are four. Well, Mishna hatan detana shtayim shein arba b'fnim v'shtayim shein arba b'chutz. Okay, remember, when you don't do the akiran halacha, you're actually exempt, right? So our Mishnah obviously listed the four cases where you're actually liable: two of bringing in and two of bringing out, or I should say two of bringing out first, which are the two first ones, and then two of bringing in. So hatam diikar Shabbat hu tanei avot v'toladot. There, the main topic was Shabbat. In Masechet Shabbat. So because of that, they brought the avot and they brought the toladot, and the cases where you're not really liable. It's similar, and you'd be liable by rabbinic law, but not by Torah law. Hacha delavi kar Shabbatu. But in our case, right, our Mishnah is not talking about Shabbat. That's not the topic of our chapter or our Masechet. Tane avot tane v'toladot lo tane. It just brings the avot. It doesn't bring the toladot. So they say, wait a minute. Avot ma'inidu. What are the real avot? Yitziot. Yitziot is taking it out from Reshut HaYachid, private domain, to a public domain. That's the avot. Yitziot tarte havyan, right? So the avot are right. The avot are yitziot, but yitziot are only two, right? So if you're saying our Mishnah talks only about the avot, what do you mean? Our Mishnah talks about. Remember how we described our Mishnah? It's two that are by Torah and two that the rabbis added to the Torah law, as if they have status of Torah law, but they're really toladot. Because the Torah talked about bringing things out. And now we're saying it's also bringing things out and also bringing things in from public to private. And if you want to say maybe our Mishnah was talking about in Toladot, maybe we misunderstood the two therefore. Maybe the two are taking them out, and whether the ani puts his hand in and takes it out, or the rich person, or the homeowner takes his hand out and puts it out, right? And the two toladot are the cases that are exempt, which is the balabaya put his hand out and the ani put the item in the balabaya's hand, or the other case where it's the reverse. So maybe that's what it means. But we already learned you can't say that our Mishnah is talking about two that are liable and two you're not liable for, because hadumi de marot negaim ktane. It's like marot negaim, and the toladot of negaim you have the same halacha. So mahatam kulu lechiyuva, just like they're all obligated in them all. Avhacha kulu lechiyuva. Also here, it would all be obligated. Ela amra papa hatam diikar Shabbat tani chiyuva p'turei. So here again, there because the main topic is Shabbat, they brought where you're chayav and where you're patur, right? All over Shabbat. If you remember, we had a lot of cases where you're exempt by Torah law, just liable by rabbinic law. So they brought all the laws. So now it's not a vote in toladot. It's where you're liable. There's two that are four, two in the Torah, right? And two that are defined as if they're Torah law, but they're not really written explicitly in the Torah, but it doesn't bring all of the Torah ones. So now they say, but wait, what are you liable for? Yitziot. Yitziot, tarte udahavyan. Again, if you're going to say, though, what you're really obligated by Torah law is only taking things out. And our Mishnah brings all four, also bringing things in. So they say, and also that's what it says. It says yitziot, taking things out. So they say, no, shtayim dehotza'ah, ushtayim dachnasa. No, it's two that you bring things out and two that you bring things into the private domain from the public domain. To which they say, v'hayitziot katani, but it says yitziot Shabbat, taking things out, which would only be private to public. So Amar Rav Ashi, no, Tana hachnasa nami hotza'ah karele. The Tana who brought our Mishnah held that also taking things in, bringing something in the house is also called taking things out. Okay, mimai. How do we know that, right? What do you mean? Taking out is out, bringing in is in. So we're going to turn to Amud Bet now. Titnan hamotzi mirashut lerashut chayav. Okay, when are you liable according to a Mishnah, right? This Mishnah in Shabbat. You're liable when you take things from one domain to another domain. Now, Milo askina de ka'amalai liyule v'kakar lehotzah, right? Notice, what does it mean, reshut? Reshut means from one domain to another, which could be private to public, but it also could be public to private. And public to private is bringing in. And yet, notice what it says, hamotzi, you take out. V'kakar lehotzah, it calls it taking out, even though it's talking about bringing in, right? So that proves that the Mishnah in general uses yitziah when they really mean even hachnasa, bringing it in. B'dilma, wait, but maybe kamapik me reshut yachid reshut rabim. Maybe it means taking things out of the reshut yachid, out of a private domain, and bring it into the public domain. Maybe that's what they mean. Im kain nitneha, right? Maybe hamotzime reshut reshut is really bringing from the private to the public. Who's to say it goes the other way around, and that hotza'ah also means hachnasa? To which they say, no, im kain nitneha hamotzime reshut yachid reshut rabim. If it wanted to say that, it would have said taking from the private to the public. Why did they leave it open? They left it ambiguous from one domain to another domain. Right? If you wanted to say private to public, you would have said private to public. Okay, so afilu mirashut arvim l'rashut yachid. It must mean that it means even from public to private, and kakari lehotza'ah, and it proves it. So now they're going to ask the obvious question, Tamamai, why would you call bringing in? Why would you call it bringing out? To which great answer, Tana, for the one who wrote this Mishnah, kol akirat chefetz mimkomo hotza'ah karila. Taking out an object from where its normal dwelling place is called taking it out, right? So even if you're bringing it into the house, that's taking it out of the public domain. It's taking it out from where it is, which makes perfect sense. Okay, so in the end, what did we try to prove here? What we started with here in this section was, it says Shtayim Shein Arba. Why did it say in the other Mishnah Shtayim Shein Arba Bifnim and Shtayim Shein Arba B'chutz, and brought double the amount of cases? That's because here we weren't interested in the cases where you're exempt. We're only interested in the cases where you're liable. Okay, and that's because it's like Negaim and like all the other cases where you're liable in all the cases. And then we just had to explain, well, then Hotza'ah really means also Haknasa. And then we explained, yeah, it could. Okay, now I'm a Ravina. Ravina is going to further prove this. Matnita Nami Daika. You can also infer it from our Mishnah. Dekatane Yitziot Shabbat Shtein Shein Arba Bifnim. You could prove it, from the Mishnah in Shabbat, because it says Shtein Shein Arba Bifnim, Shtein Shein Arba B'chutz. Notice it says Yitziot HaShabbat. There also it says Yitziot HaShabbat, and obviously half the cases are Haknasa, not Hotza'ah. V'kamefarish Haknasa. And it explained Haknasa Shmamina. So that's a proof. Rava gives a whole different explanation. Rava Amal, Rishuyot Katani, Rishuyot Shabbat Shtayim. When it says Yitziot, shouldn't be read as Yitziot. It should be read as Rishuyot. And the way you should read it is Rishuyot Shabbat Shtayim. There's two domains, public and private, and that breaks down into 4 cases of public and private cases. It's a very interesting interpretation because it means the Shtein Shein Arba is very different than in all the other cases in the Mishnah. And strange the Gemara doesn't ask that, because again, what does it mean here? There's 2 domains, and from those 2 domains, you have 4 permutations of cases where one can be liable. And then it's a very different Shtein Shein Arba. Okay, last thing for today. Maro Negaim Shtein Shein Arba. Okay, leprous marks. There's 2, which are 4. Again, right? What does that mean? There's 2 leprous marks, and from each one, you're going to have a toladav, each one, a case that's very similar. Tnan hatam. Okay, there's a Mishnah in Masechet Negaim, which says Marot Negaim Shnaim Shem Arba. And what are they? And here they basically elaborate on our Mishnah. Baheret azak keshelek. Baheret is white like snow, very, very light. Shniala. Okay, secondary to that, meaning the tolada of that is kisid hayachal, like the plaster they would use in the sanctuary. Se'et kitzemer lavan. Okay, se'et is like white wool, okay, which is a little darker than snow. Shniala kikrum beitza, the membrane of the egg is the tolada of that one, of the se'et. Amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina says, Manta. Now, what you really need to understand before we move on is that there's an order of white to darker. So we have the baheret, which is the lightest, right? That's the snow. We have se'et, which is white wool. Then we go to the sid haichal, which is the limestone, which is the tolada of the first one. And then we go to the tolada of the second. So easiest way to imagine this, A, B, right? In terms of order. So Amar Rabbi Chanina, who's the one who has this Mishnah like this? That Marot Negaim, and that we have these toladot like this? Dilo ki Rabbi Akiva. It must be not like Rabbi Akiva. De'iki Rabbi Akiva, kevanda amar zolam alamizo v'zolam alamizo. Rabbi Akiva organized them, but not only organize them, okay, if you have something in its tolada, you can put those together. Let's say you have a little bit of one and a little bit of the other, but you don't have enough of a shiur, called a grease, which is the size of a bean, a split bean. That's the size that's mitame a nega. If it's too small, smaller than that, it won't. If you have 2 leprous marks together, can you combine them? That's the question. Which ones can you combine? So Rabbi Akiva says zolam alamizo v'zolam alamizo, which is it goes in order of color, okay? And in which case you're going to have whichever you can combine 2 colors that are next to each other. So the se'ed and the baheret can combine, okay? The baheret can't combine with anything else because it's too hot, right? It's only next to se'ed. Se'ed can combine either with the baheret or it can combine with the seed, the limestone, the plaster. And that one can combine with the egg, okay? Everything can combine with whatever's next to it. And if that's the case, in kinki harta sid hayachal mi litzaref. Now, the assumption here is that The two, according to our Mishnah, if you have one is a tolada of the other, they can combine to the shiur of a gris. But according to this A, A is not next to A, right? If you call it A1, let's say, and B is not next to B1, it's tolada, so they can't combine with each other. And Rabbi Akiva said you can only combine with the one that's right next to it. So our Mishnah must not follow Rabbi Akiva. So, and if that's the case, right, what would be the problem? Tiharta sira ichal militzaref. The sira ichal could never combine with any other one, and that would be a problem. So they say, right? Why? Bahade man litzarfe, litzarfe bahade baheret ikaseit adifa mine, right? It can't combine with the baheret because se'ed is closer to it. It can only combine with the one next to it. Litzarfe bahade se'ed, if it's with the se'ed, lav tolada didei. It's not its own tolada. In other words, you would have to have it both be a tolada of and be next to it. And according to Rabbi Akiva, that would never happen. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, I don't even understand your question though. Your question was specifically about the sira ichal. Also, the krum beitzah wouldn't be able to combine with anything. Yachi krum beitzah nami bahade man litzarfe. Which one would it combine with? Litzarfe bahade seit, if it would do seit, right? Ika sid adif mine. Again, that's B1, and B1 is only next to A1. It's not next to B. Litzarfe bahade seed, if you want to put it next to this, it's next to the seed, you could combine them, but lav bar mineu, but they're not the same type. So you'd never be able to combine any of them. So why did you specifically say you won't be able to combine the sira ichal with anything? Also, the krum beitzah, the membrane of the egg would be able, the one that's the color of the membrane of an egg, leprous mark, wouldn't be able to be combined either. And this we're going to end in the middle of a question, right? Something here doesn't jive. Okay, so what did we do today? We finished up and in the end said, even though we tried to say Rebbi, actually it's his own unique position, partly like Rabbi Shmuel, partly like Rabbi Akiva. In the end, we prove it's not. And he just really taught his Mishnah. He taught that case like Rabbi Akiva, even though he doesn't hold that way. And he taught the other case like Rabbi Shmuel, and he does hold that way. Okay, that we already proved way back in the previous stuff. Then we tried to explain why it was obvious to Rebbi in the drasha we quoted earlier that ne'elam means there was a yediyah before. And we said it doesn't always work that way. Look at sotah, right? Look at these other cases. And, we kind of said this is a bit of a problem. And then we had this other explanation that maybe yediyah is actually having learned it in school. And maybe it doesn't mean what we thought it meant before. Okay, then we had Yitziot Shabbat Shtein Shein Arba, and then we compared it to the Mishnah in Shabbat, where it basically talked about two that are four and another two that are four, inside and outside, and that's not the same as our Mishnah. What's the difference between these cases, and what does it really mean Shtein Shein Arba? We even ended with some unique possibility that Rava brought, that Rishuyot Shtein Shein Arba is just Rishuyot, there's Shtein Shein Arba. And the previous one, we had to explain that Rishuyot are Hanasot and Hotzaot, and we had to basically go through a while proving how we know that you can bring something in and yet call it bringing it out. Okay, and then we finished with the Marot Negaim, and we're really kind of in a bit of a problem here that our Mishnah seems to not go like Rabbi Akiva. I don't know if it's a problem. It's interesting. It's a similar sugya to the earlier one. Oh, this doesn't seem to match Rabbi Akiva, and we'll have to finish up that in tomorrow's daf. Wishing everyone a good day.